minimize it. And we're going to pop out that chat. We're going to pop it. Not like it, we're going to pop it. How do we pop it? Pop it. Pump it louder. Okay. Now, we only got one video stream up because I know. Okay, but where'd the pop out chat go? Huh? Oh, there it is. There it is. We don't need all this business, right? Yeah, we don't need all that business up. All right, we got that all. What's the live preview looking like? Mobile preview. That's good enough. I think. That better? Yeah, that's better. All right. Trying the script today instead of the waveform. Let's see if folks like that a little more. So, what was I doing? Come on, ADHD meds. Let's go. Oh, right. I gotta open my doll. Adobe Audition. And then we'll bring that all the way over here. And we're going to start, how about file, new, audio file, session. What's the last session? What's the last session we had? Oh, we should bring that down. No, we can't bring that down. Can we bring that up? Yeah, we can. Okay, we don't need that so big. That's what she said. File. Nope. Audition. File. Open. That should tell me. Tell me. Session 11. Okay, that's what I thought. Cancel. And then we're going to file new audio file. Okay. Now we got Audition open. We're on chapter 24. I think we only have 6 chapters to go in this particular. That reflection, though. Goodness. I hear it over here. Let's try to. Oh, is that better? That's better. Okay. Pump it louder. Pump it louder. Are you ready? Okay. All right. My lovelies, let's put the keyboard. My desk is so full. Y'all can't see it, but the other part of my desk is hobby stuff. So I've got paint. I got an L desk, so I've got paints over here on this side for my miniature war dollies. So, yeah. Okay. We're going to do a little bit of mustachio maintenance. I've been neglecting this beautiful bastard for the past few days. So. I don't expect to get a lot of views on this. Anybody lurking? Because I've been doing a lot of political stuff lately. And it's not exactly the popular half of the mainstream. So, meaning morals and stuff. Anywho, encourage your viewers to share your live and invite more friends. Okay. We're gonna. Oh. Noam Chomsky. Know me. Can you see him? Yeah, I don't know if you can see him. No, you can't see him today. Okay. It's all right. He's keeping me company. This is my buddy. Haha. It makes me smile. Oh, mother that. Okay. Doing a. What are you caught on, chair? Every morning, some dumb stuff like this, and I gotta adjust my dude. My dude is not happy with me. I'm hyper and tired today, so yeah, we don't really know what kind of experience we're gonna have today. So yeah, okay. No, I don't want top chat. I want newest live chat. Participants, timestamps, reactions, and feedback. I don't care. Loud up. Okay. One of the final steps is we get our Altoids and put that in the mouth because ADHD meds dehydrate you. I like these little tins. Okay. Okay. Now we are the youth of the nation. We are. Are you gonna be a pain in my ass today? Is that what's happening? Okay. Yeah, so you forgot. You forgot audio hardware. Control surface. So now we have to re-add our little control surface here for Logi plugin. Boop. Okay. Okay. And then we're going to open the loop deck. And hopefully loop deck. Really? Did you forget everything again because I restarted my computer? I like this control surface. I really do. But it forgets Adobe Audition, and it's really annoying. So now this is what you have to deal with. So like, which one do I have? Like that's okay. Okay, we're trying to add a profile, right? And I might have to restart the ticky-tock here. Okay. Workspace. Okay. Hold on. Add application. Select application. Audition. Okay. Gotta close audition. Boop. No. Oh my goodness. Apparently I have an update. Okay. Well, we're yeah. This is typical. Mm-hmm. 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 18 minutes in, got exactly jack shit done. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I know. I know. Got all these notifications for something I was trying to do in the first place. Pump it louder. Do I have to do that again? Huh? Mm-hmm. Audition. Mm. Okay, gotta do it again because that was an update. I can be brown, I can be blue, I can be violet skies. I could be hurtful, I could be purple, I could be anything you like. Okay, Adobe Audition. One more time. Settings, audio hardware, control surface. I didn't do it. Okay. So we have to delete everything. Remove. Remove. Add. Device class. Logic plugin. Boom. Okay. Boom. Why are you giving me this bullshit? Mm-hmm. How about? Okay. Well, you are being a pain in my butt today. Yo. Okay. Add. Control surface. Logi plugin. Okay. Right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. And now are we gonna restart? Is that what we need to do? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're just being a pain in the ass today, dude. And then file, open, session, new, file new. Ta-da! Oh, you're still fucking grayed out. But will you work? This is pissing me angry. This is making me big mad. I am big mad right now. I just installed it, dude. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Control surface. Logi plugin. Gotcha. Well, you're just being a little bitch today. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. 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 Fighting with my hardware right now, so. Hello. Let's refresh. No? I'll scroll. Dude, you're making me mad. You're making me mad. Like big mad. Okay. Well, I guess we're not using you today. We're just going to use our keyboard and mouse because screw you, honky. Okay, I'm gonna restart the TikTok. I'll be back in a minute. And for you folks on the YouTube, I know I'm new here, so we're gonna give you that guy to look at. Nene, shut up. It's like nobody wants me to work today. Okay. Bullshit. Barking ass dog issues. Coffee issues. Coffee issues. Yeah. I know that was okay. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, we're gonna do this. A little old school, that's fine. Oh, I almost fell the frick over. Okay. I am overstimulated today, guys. Okay. Here goes. Now, we are going to start by putting everything on Do Not Disturb. All right, now we're going to restart this guy. There we go. No sound detected in my butt. Make sure Scarlet. Okay, 100%. 100%. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Make sure nobody's coming out where it shouldn't come out. You know what I mean? Know what I'm saying? Know what I'm saying? Know what I'm saying? Okay. So that would be my luck this morning. All right, so let's minimize all this. 66 notifications on Creative Cloud. And okay. All right. Yep. You can suck that loop deck. Okay. Here we go. Chair. Oh, you're a pain in my ass today. Chapter 24. A Coward's Dilemma. Despite the appearance of the portal, they didn't cut their baths short. If they were going to die, they would milk every last drop of enjoyment beforehand. In fact, both men stared at the opening for a solid 5 minutes just to make sure nothing popped out at them. Once satisfied, they lingered until their skin was uncomfortably wrinkled, as if creeping toward an unpleasant fate. As if creeping toward an unpleasant fate, they slowly donned their garments and shouldered their equipment. "What do you think it is?" Eliard asked. "Well, I'd hope we'd have noticed if it was there when we walked in, since it's big enough to fit Gertrude through. So, it might be the path to the rest of the maze, triggered by... Well, I'd hope we'd have noticed if it was there when we walked in, since it's big enough to fit Gertrude through. So it might be the path to the rest of the maze, triggered by something we did here. Despite how my ribs hurt, that didn't feel like the guardian we were looking for. Despite how my ribs hurt, that didn't feel like the guardian we were looking for. There's also no gate out. Like, there's also no gate out, like near where we found Gertrude. Rolf buckled the chest strap of his pack and clapped Eliard on the shoulder. But if something was going to pop out of it and murder us, it probably would have done it while we were in our skivvies. He strode toward the gigantic archway in the wall without pausing at the threshold for more than a moment. Nope. He strode toward the gigantic archway in the wall without pausing at the threshold for more than a moment. He strode toward the gigantic archway in the wall without pausing at the threshold for more than a moment to examine the carving at its edge. He strode toward the gigantic archway in the wall while... Crom, help me. Breed, help me. Morrigan, help me. Gaia, help me. I am overstimulated today. Okay. He strode toward the giant archway in the wall without pausing at the threshold for more than a moment to examine the carving at its edge. Thank you. It's the lever all over again. Nope, not that one. It's the lever all over again, Eliard cried in dismay from behind. It's like you've learned nothing. Grumbling and the clatter of the man snatching his spear off the ground followed Rolf. Gertrude's loud steps padding in behind him. Eliard collided with Rolf's back, where he had stopped only a couple feet into the next room. What are you doing? Stopping like... His words cut off abruptly as he apparently took in what Rolf had already seen. Instead of an extension of the manicured oasis, they stepped... There's no comma there, dude. Hi, Gobi. How you doing? Instead of an extension of the manicured oasis, they stepped into a crystalline cave. Rolf had once held a cracked geode, and the way the light scintillated within colored stone had fascinated him. This was much the same, and his mouth fell open in awe. Despite the splashes of light from luminescent fungus reflecting on the gorgeous spines of crystal, the room itself had a monkish austerity. The floor was flat and clean, if rough. The crystal formations sat in triplets on the wide quartz floor, spaced relatively evenly. Let's get another mint. Another mint. It didn't take much light to fully illuminate the bone-white room, and it shone like a pearl. It struck Rolf as a It struck Rolf as closer to a church than a cave. The Triad, he whispered, and his words echoed strangely in the rocky chapel. Eliard said nothing, but walked silently beside him. Larger than the church in Mayfair, this annex seemed an odd offshoot from the labyrinth, like nothing they'd seen in their journey so far. At the far end of the space were two asymmetrical doorways. As Rolf got closer, they resolved into a large door on the right and a smaller solid mass of black stone, incongruous with the rest of the architecture on the left. The door was large enough for Gertrude to fit through, if perhaps a tight squeeze, but the other obsidian slab was fit for a man alone. "What is this?" Eliard asked. "Wish I knew," Rolf replied. Between the portals sat a stone table upon which two crystals protruded from the surface. Similar to the portals, the left was black like the deepest onyx, while the right was an opal reflecting all the colors present in the room. "Wait, there's something inscribed here." Rolf stepped forward and peered at the small writing. "Weary traveler," he read aloud, "you have faced the perils of our labyrinth and survived this far. For this, you deserve praise." "Too right," Eliard huffed, but shut up when Rolf shot him a dirty look. Rolf cleared his throat to continue. "But only by embracing our final challenge will you deserve our blessing." "What does that mean?" Rolf asked. "If you'd let me keep reading." "You're the one who keeps pausing dramatically." Rolf sighed and placed his fingers to his temples. "Touch the black stone and take your leave." "Though venture to this depth again, and this path will be closed to you. Touch our colors and receive our blessing for your continued success." Rolf stepped back, allowing Eliard to cram himself against the plinth and read the words for himself, his mouth moving silently as he did so. Rolf looked up at Gertrude and wished he could speak to her. Touching the wellspring of power within, he found that the pool hadn't only healed his wounds, but also replenished his magic. "Gertrude!" Rolf cried, the blue glow covering the dinosaur's snout. "We can leave!" She looked from Rolf to the doorways. "How?" "Touch the black stone, the one on the left." Gertrude sidestepped to allow herself to lean over and place her small hand on the smooth onyx. To Rolf's dismay, nothing miraculous happened. No lights, no magic. Nothing activated the darkstone portal beside them. No lights, no magic, nothing activated the dark stone portal beside them. It is not meant for me, supperling, she whined. No, it's meant for us. Eliard's voice held a manic tone. Eliard's voice held a manic note that Rolf didn't like. What's that supposed to mean, Eliard? The Lancer turned and held his hands up in a placating gesture. Don't you see? We don't have to keep going. We can go home. Gertrude can't make it through, Eliard. We have to keep going to get to the gate at the center of the maze, the one Gertrude can fit through. Maybe you do, but I'm getting out of here while I can. Eliard lowered his hand to the black stone, but Rolf shoved himself between the cleric and his prize. You can't do this, Eliard. We've come so far, Rolf grunted, shoving up at Eliard. Shh. Rolf grunted, shoving at Eliard to keep him back from the button. The larger man reached over Rolf's head, straining too much. The larger man reached over Rolf's head, straining to touch the dark stone. I haven't seen my family in ages, Rolf. My children haven't had their father for 2 years. Get out of my way. Rolf pressed his hand against the man's face, pushing him back. But we promised. The blow caught Rolf by surprise, and he tumbled sideways to the floor, his ears ringing with the strength of Eliard's fist. Gertrude roared and snapped at Eliard, but the Lancer held his spear menacingly toward Gertrude's face. Rolf's proximity to Eliard seemed to make Gertrude unwilling to do more than growl at the man, biting at the... Rolf's proximity to Eliard seemed to make Gertrude unwilling to do more than growl at the man, biting at the air above his spear. No, he spat. You promised. Then you captured me and forced me to follow you into this harebrained adventure. Call off your pet before I do something I'll regret. Do I eat him now, tiny dinosaur, for his treachery? Rolf rubbed his cheek, his head spinning from the strike. He stood unsteadily, bracing himself against the wall. No, let him go. We don't need him. Gertrude did not seem pleased, but only blew out hot breath over Eliard before moving around to the large door. Eliard, for his part, moved to stand closer to the obsidian slab and waited. Rolf touched the opal without hesitation. Heat flooded him like fire suffusing his body, but it was not painful. This heat flooded him like fire suffusing his body, but it was not painful. The sensation was similar to what had happened when he had killed the Minotaur, only this time it was uncomfortably strong. Power seeped through his bones, and he knew his magic had been enhanced. His resilience and strength as well. When he had transitioned from explorer to adventurer, It had been something. When he had transitioned from explorer to adventurer, it had been something like this. The mason staggered. The mason staggered and placed his hand on the plinth to keep from falling over again. Mother's embrace, that was a lot. What happened to you? Eliard asked, though his spear was still trained on Gertrude. You don't get to ask, Rolf growled at Eliard. Are you all right? Gertrude echoed. Gertrude echoed Eliard's sentiment, and Rolf smiled weakly at the dinosaur. I'm fine. You should try touching it too, just in case. Gertrude pressed her talons to the opal, but as before, nothing happened. She huffed and shook herself again. Again, this is not meant for me. The gate. Again, this is not meant for me. The gate is all we need, Gertrude. I'll get you there. Rolf rested a hand on Gertrude's scales, and the dinosaur rumbled in quiet. Rolf rested a hand on Gertrude's scales, and the dinosaur rumbled in quiet reply. The mason pulled on the handle of the. The mason pulled on the handle of the great door, and to his surprise, it swung open easily on near silent hinges. He wondered what waited on the other side, but threw the thought away. I'm keeping my promise, he said, and strode through the gate, even if it kills me. Even if it kills me. That was a good chapter. Mark. Hi, Caesar. Kassar. Junie joined. Hello, Junie. And Junie didn't stay, but Mattel joined as well, and then he leaves. All right. Here we go. Here we go, here we go, here we go now. Here we go, here we go, here we go now. Chapter 25, Mirror Images. After passing through the Triad's gate, Rolf wasn't sure which direction he was traveling in anymore. The transition struck him as odd, just as entering the central maze had been a stark contrast to the naturally formed. Let's try that again. The transition struck him as odd, just as entering the central maze had been a stark contrast to the naturally formed caverns he and Eliard had traversed on their way. Eliard, that swine. Leave it to the man to be exactly what he had shown himself as, a coward through and through. Rolf wouldn't have been surprised to find that Elyard had no wife and children, but clung to a lie that started back when he had met Ross and his party. The corridors were similar to the uniform shape where he had lost Gertrude, but instead of a sandy stone, these were huge blocks, laid like bricks. The corridors were similar to the uniform shape where he had lost Gertrude, but instead of sandy stones, these were huge blocks laid like bricks, and the floor was cobbled with large stones worn smooth over time. Sconces lined the walls here as well, torches burning brightly, but the dark stone devoured much of the light. He would have expected to find something like this in a castle or a battlement wall, not deep within the labyrinth. Everything was still sized for creatures. Everything was still sized for creatures of Gertrude's dimensions, so he felt a bit like a doll, a plaything of the triad, traipsing through a hallway made for giants. He flexed his shoulders and neck as he walked, still reeling from the goddess's blessing. His mind had expanded in a way as yet unclear to him, and he could tell he was stronger. Was he a hero now? Rolf scoffed at himself. He would be a hero if he got Gertrude out. He would be a hero if he got Gertrude out of there and he would be a hero if he got Gertrude out of there and could sit in his father's old armchair with his feet by the fire. His father. A tear formed in his eye, blurring half his vision. He blinked it away and cursed. Now was not the time to. Rolf! The cry brought Rolf back to reality in the middle of a corridor he had no memory of turning down. Gertrude walked beside him, seemingly trusting that he knew the way, which he most certainly did not. He had been so. I got the allergies, coach. Softy sunshine. Hello. Stop it, chair. Goodness. Okay, we're going to start with. Okay. Let's start at Rolf scoffed at himself. Rolf scoffed at himself. He would be a hero if he could get Gertrude out of there, and he would be a hero if he got Gertrude out of there and could sit on his father's old armchair with his feet by the fire. His father, A tear formed in his eye, blurring half his vision. He blinked it away and cursed. Now was not the time to. Now was not the time to. Rolf! The cry, the cry brought Rolf back to reality in the middle of a corridor he had no memory of turning down. Gertrude walked beside him, seemingly trusting that he knew the way, which he most certainly did not. Had he been so lost in thought? How many traps could he have sprung by now? Rolf. The voice came again, though weaker. He knew that tone. A familiar timbre. He turned about, scanning for doors or passageways. No rooms branched off the hall, but a four-way intersection lay ahead. Father? He asked in a halting voice. Help me! The sound came from the left, as far as he could tell, and he quickened his steps. He needed to talk with Gertrude, so cast his spell as he walked. I don't know how, but my father is down here. Gertrude sniffed the air. I do not know what he smells like, but some man-thing walks the paths. Turning left revealed a hallway, much like the one they had just been in, but in the distant torchlight, a dark shape scurried away from them. It might have been one figure or two. It was so hard to tell. Wait! Rolf yelled, and the echo carried back to him as he picked up the pace further, heedless of the potential Rolf yelled, and the echo carried back to him as he picked up the pace further, heedless of the potential dangers. What magic existed here? Was the Triad so cruel as to bestow their blessings on him? Was the Triad so cruel as to bestow their blessings on him, only to steal his father away from the surface as some kind of test? He would have strong words for Albeth if he managed to find his way home again. Goddesses be damned. The shadowed figure turned right at the end of the path, as there was only one direction to go, damn it. The shadowed figure turned right at the end of the path, as there was only one direction to go. Rolf pelted after it, his boots making sharp cracks against the stone. When he reached the turn himself, he seemed to have gained no ground. And was... When he reached the turn himself, he seemed to have gained no ground and was as far from his quarry as before. Gertrude, I need your help. The dinosaur didn't ask questions, but picked him up by his pack. Her teeth sank into the canvas, and the chest strap pulled against him. It may have been uncomfortable, but Rolf marveled at her speed as Gertrude built into a charge. The air whipped past his face, and the thing they pursued began to resolve into a cloaked humanoid. It didn't glance back at them as they approached, so he couldn't make out their face, but it was roughly the height of his father. But then why did it run from him? Another intersection approached, and this time their target continued straight. They had closed the gap sufficiently that Rolf had an idea. They had closed the gap. They had closed the gap sufficiently that Rolf had an idea. "Throw me at it," he yelled, jostling through. He yelled, jostled though he was by the dinosaur's gate. With a toss of her head, Gertrude sent Rolf flying at the running creature. The pair collided and went down in a heap. Rolf tumbled a short distance and tried to orient himself as Gertrude roared. A loud clanking noise played counterpoint to her complaint. His head whipped around at the sound and found a large iron cage had closed around the dinosaur, the equivalent of an iron portcullis fallen from each of the four directions of the intersection. She butted her head against the metal bands useless. She butted her head against the metal bands uselessly. Gertrude must have triggered a trap in her haste to throw him. The body-shaped lump Rolf had collided with shifted, drawing back his attention. The dinosaur could wait a moment. He crawled closer as the cloak fell away from the man's face. "Dad?" He would need to throttle Olveth. He would need to throttle Olveth after all, once he was out of this, because Mason's face stared back at him. People often referred to Rolf as the spitting image of his father, albeit younger. He would need to throttle Olveth after all, once he was out of this, because Mason's face stared back at him. People often referred to Rolf as the spitting image of his father, albeit younger. He hadn't seen it personally, but now that he crouched by his father, he understood why the majority of Mayfair said so. "Rolf," Mason said. He hadn't heard his father's voice in years. No. "Hi, Terry." "Hi. Hi. He hadn't heard his father's voice in the years since he and his mother retired. Not that one. He hadn't heard his father's voice in the years since his mother. Slow down, do it. Slow down, do it. He hadn't heard his father's voice in the years since he and his mother retired. His stomach flipped. "How did you get here? Is Mom here too?" "No, just me." Mason patted his arms and struggled to stand. Rolf hurried to help him up. "I don't know, some kind of teleporting spell, probably." He stretched his back, the familiar cracking along He stretched his back, the familiar cracking along his spine filling the air. "Why did you run from me?" Mason gestured at the dinosaur behind Rolf. "Looks like the problem solved itself." Gertrude stuck at the cage again. Gertrude struck at the cage again, a frustrated groan rumbling from her belly. Right. That made enough sense, Rolf figured. If he had seen his son being presumably chased by a dinosaur, he might have thought the same. "That's my friend. Speaking of," he used his opportunity to approach the cage. "Wait, Rolf!" Mason grasped frantically at his wrist. "You should leave it where it is." Rolf chuckled. "It's fine. I mean it. He gently extracted himself and turned back to Gertrude. Let's see how we can get you out of this one. Let's see how we can get you out of this one, he muttered, drawing out his hammer and feeling at the solid rungs of the trap. Gertrude's eyes narrowed at something behind him, and she bellowed a roar he hadn't heard before. The hairs on the back of his neck stood at the sound, and he spun, bringing up his hammer barely in time to catch a dagger's downward slash. Mason's lips were pulled tight around a wolfish grin Rolf had never seen him wear. Mason's lips were pulled tight around a wolfish grin Rolf had never seen him wear, and an unmistakable reddish glow rimmed his irises. He would have to apologize to Albeth. This was not his father. He pushed Not Mason's attack off, and the man bounced lightly backwards, completely unbothered that Rolf had parried a surprise attack. I told you to leave it where it is, the thing snarled. I told you to leave it where it is, the thing snarled. Gertrude's own rumbling growl vibrated through the ground beneath Rolf's feet, and Rolf used the space he had gained to set his back more central to the cage. He watched Not Mason's footwork closely as his heart thundered in his chest. Who are you? The creature, pretending to be Rolf's father, laughed in Mason's voice, but it was a distortion of the merriment Mason's laughter normally carried. What do you mean, Rolf? I am your father. You're nothing like him. Rolf eyed the ground beneath his father's doppelganger's feet. If he moved quickly, he might be able to summon some vines to root him in place. He just had to move carefully. Not Mason gave Rolf a slight pout. I thought I did pretty good. He rubbed the edge of his jaw. Dear old Dad wasn't an easy maneuver after all. Memories from a distance are finicky. He moved more quickly than Rolf's eyes could follow, launching himself across the space, dagger held low. The Mason tried to call on a spell. He had discovered during their last fight and struggled to push magic into the ground through his legs and feet. Vines erupted between them, reaching greedily for his opponent. He couldn't pinpoint specifically where the doppelganger's ankles might be, but he figured if he covered enough surface area, it might do the job. While the vines didn't catch the doppelganger's feet, it forced him to sidestep the patch, allowing Rolf enough time to levy a defense. He brought his hammer up to push the dagger away and leveraged his foot between them, shoving as hard as he could manage. The doppelganger stumbled backwards but dipped and twisted, returning another blow, forcing Rolf to step backwards with each step and thrust. The doppelganger stumbled backwards but dipped and twisted, returning another blow, forcing Rolf to step backwards with each swipe and thrust. Gertrude let out a desperate roar from behind them and tried butting her way through the bars, smashing her head against it again and again. If Rolf had any shred of attention to spare, he would have been concerned that she would hurt herself before making any progress getting out. Pretty little thing you have there. The doppelganger nodded to the hammer as Rolf caught another glancing blow off the end of it. Rolf's arm shook with the effort of fending off his attacker, and sweat trickled down the back of his neck. He couldn't pause to fully consider how much danger he was in. He couldn't allow himself to freeze up. Not if he wanted to get out of this alive. Not if he wanted to get Gertrude out alive. You like it? Rolf taunted back, searching for an opening. My father gave it to me. My father gave it to me. On the last syllable, he shoved hard against his opponent and threw his magic into the thrust. Vines erupted from the ground and climbed the doppelganger. Vines erupted from the ground and climbed the doppelganger's legs, pulling him away from Rolf's grasp and rooting him to the floor. Gertrude roared an eager affirmative. Were Rolf able to understand her, he expected she was telling him to finish the creature off. Instead, the figure's face shifted, and Rolf couldn't help but stare as it contorted into a visage that horrified him. The mirror image of his own features. Right, we're going to pause there for a second. I'm going to go take a small vocal break, get some more water. Hydrate, take care of the tool here. And then I'll be back in 5-ish. I can't play music because TikTok now doesn't allow it. And I'm too lazy to go get the open software for now. So anyways, I'll be back. And we'll leave you in the care of good old Noam Chomsky. Okay. All right, Noam, behave yourself. Y'all, behave. I'll be back. Almost forgot my water, didn't I? Boom. Oh. Oh, Danny boy. My mother-in-law is driving me crazy today. Where are my keys? There's my keys. Okay, I'm back. This is like a morning of mornings, guys. A morning of mornings. Not like terrible, it's just annoying. You know what I mean? Is it just the paints? Okay. My money don't wiggle wiggle. It's bold. Okay. Because we just had a break, I'm going to go ahead and restart the tiki-talk. And we get some new faces in here and live. I'll be right back. And I'm back. All right. Let's how. Yeah, we should probably. What is that? Session 13. We should probably open another session. New audio file. (13C). All right, that's a fresh slate. Oh, excuse me. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. All right. Hanging out with my buddy Noam Chomsky over here. Boop. That's my boy. Right. Right. Okay. But usually it's because allergies. Allergies are great. Allergies are wonderful. I should probably do some stretches. Maybe this could be like a narration fitness thing. Be like Scotty K, but without the homophobia. Okay, here we go. Chapter 26. No, not that one. Chapter 26. A bit of self-loathing. I know that's wonderful. I love Texas in the springtime. Okay. Chapter 26. A bit of self-loathing. A bit of self-loathing. Rolf stumbled backwards in surprise. Useless, Rolf's own voice said to him. What are you even trying to do here? What are you even trying to do here? You're way out of your depth. Rolf, the real one, didn't know much about doppelgangers. Rolf, the real one, didn't know much about doppelgangers. The creature had mentioned something about memories from a distance, but now they were face to face. It stared into his eyes like it knew his soul. His conjured vines held the monster's dagger immobile, but muscles had appeared. But muscles that appeared stronger than the ones they mimic strained against their bonds. I'm just trying to get home, Rolf panted. I'm just trying to get home, Rolf panted. He sucked in air, trying to catch his breath after the flurry of attacks from his erstwhile twin. You're going to die here, just like the rest of them. No one survives an encounter. No one survives an encounter with my master. No one survives an encounter with my master. Master? This was the first time Rolf had heard reference to the foe at the end of the maze. This was the first time Rolf had heard reference to the foe at the end of the maze. He thought quickly, wondering if there was a way to turn the encounter to an... Now! Master? Master? This was the first time Rolf had heard reference to the foe at the center of the maze. He thought quickly, wondering if there was a way to turn the encounter to his advantage. If that's so, let me go then. If your master is sure to kill me, then... If your master is sure to kill me, what harm could there be in letting me walk into the jaws of the lion? His mirror twin laughed in contempt, and Rolf hoped he never sounded like that. His mirror twin laughed in contempt, and Rolf hoped he never sounded like that. We all have our purposes. Well, not you, perhaps. I couldn't find a single reason to keep living in that head of yours. I couldn't find a single reason to keep living in that head of yours. Rude, Rolf complained. That was not going the way. This was not going the way he had hoped. What's your reason for being here? I was created for the trials, like any creature here. But more specifically, I'm here to distract and ultimately kill you. Simple enough, I suppose. Rolf sniffed the air, and the scent of something burning tickled his nose. Gertrude roared plaintively, and Rolf reached for his magic so he could understand whatever she was trying to tell him. Unfortunately, he came up empty. His efforts to ensnare the doppelganger had burned through the last of his reserves. He examined the scene in front of him, searching for what was out of place. He examined the scene in front of him, searching for what was out of place. The vine still held his enemy, who held a glowing red dagger, except its weapon had been plain steel before. Well, that's no good, he whined and leaped forward to swing his hammer at the doppelganger's wrist. Hi, Murray. Well, that's no good, he whined and leapt forward to swing his hammer at the doppelganger's wrist. As if in slow motion, the cherry red blade sizzled through the mirror. As if in slow motion, the cherry red blade sizzled through the remainder of the vine, allowing its hand to drop. Damn it. As if in slow motion, the cherry red blade sizzled through the remainder of the vine, allowing its hand to drop a hair's width before Rolf's strike would have allowing its hand to drop a hair's width before Rolf's strike would have hit true. Instead, in a lightning quick maneuver, his opponent flipped the dagger into a reverse grip. Damn it. Instead, in a lightning quick maneuver, his opponent flipped the dagger into a reverse grip and leaned the blade against Rolf's forearm, pressing down. Rolf cried out in pain and dropped his sole weapon. In 3 quick slashes, the doppelganger freed its remaining limbs from their verdant bonds and kicked Rolf's hammer skittering across the corridor. You won't be needing that anymore. Wouldn't want to hurt yourself, now would you? Wouldn't want to hurt yourself, now would you? Mm-mm. Wouldn't want to hurt yourself now, would you? It gave him a wink and a leering smile. Rolf backed away as cautiously as he could. Just because he and Gertrude had sprung this creature's trap didn't mean there wasn't another waiting for him. Traps. Rolf reached around an unshouldered fern staff. The over-complicated walking stick had been his constant companion, testing their path for hidden dangers. Now it was the closest thing to a weapon he had left to hand. Now it was the closest thing to a weapon he had left to hand. See, Rolf replied, if you think I like myself enough to not hurt a copy of me, you need to dig a little deeper. He hefted the would-be cudgel and swung it at his opponent. He hefted the would-be cudgel and swung it at his opponent, who sidestepped nimbly now that he wasn't entangled. The doppelganger lunged again, trying to get inside Rolf's reach. The mason slapped the attack aside with his staff, throwing an The mason slapped the attack aside with his staff, throwing orange sparks at the contact. The dagger being enchanted was a concern, but he hoped the staff's properties at least imbued it with a bit of magical resilience. You're using Fandring's staff as a club? You should lay down and let me end your suffering, man-child. You should lay down and let me end your suffering, man-child. Rolf bristled at the talk, even though he accepted it was meant to goad him. He didn't know the staff had a name or any use of it, because the only wizard present on this level had been squashed to a pulp by the dinosaur imprisoned behind him. He pressed his attack, holding it like a quarterstaff, striking to the right and left with as much power and speed as he could muster. With each hit, his evil twin twitched its dagger side to side, blocking each swing. Colorful sprays of light followed each like a hammer on hot iron. Rolf's face and neck boiled with rage. I'm not even supposed to be here! The last blow slipped under the dagger's guard and took his foe in the chest, driving the breath from its lungs with a sharp exhalation. It wasn't enough, it seemed. It wasn't enough, it seemed. Even though the thing stepped back, it wasn't in retreat, but into another guard posture. It held its blade horizontally in front to ward off more attacks. I see the cub has teeth. It really is too bad you'll never see your father again. It really is too bad you'll never see your father again. He might finally be proud of you for something. He might finally be proud of you for something. Rolf took the end of the staff in two hands, raised it high above his head, and brought it down against the doppelganger with all the force his magically enhanced strength gave him. The other man raised his dagger to parry, but the glint of humor in the creature's eyes vanished when the two weapons collided and the staff exploded. Rolf flew backward and slammed into the metal lattice of Gertrude's cage. His vision swam and faded to white. For an indeterminate amount of time, Rolf was blind to the world around him. His eyes overflowed with tears. His chest ached like he had been headbutted by the village bull, and his ears rang. Gertrude cried out, but her voice was muffled and distant. Rolf's equilibrium failed, and he fell onto his side. The T-Rex's face peered sideways at him. The T-Rex's face peered sideways at him as his eyes closed and consciousness fled. When Rolf awoke, it was to a massive, wet tongue running across his face. He pushed the disgusting muscle away with a miserable groan. His blurry eyesight notwithstanding, Rolf couldn't mistake the fact that Gertrude had freed herself from her iron prison. He rubbed liberally at his face, and eventually the binocular vision he had always taken for granted returned. I must have been out cold, Rolf mused, taking in the scene. The side of the portcullis-like cage had burst outward. The riveted bands had popped and torn, and clearly Gertrude had forced her bulk through the opening until it was large enough to accommodate her. Rolf tried to cast his communication spell, but the attempt fizzled. As it had when he fought the doppelganger. Crone's beard. What happened to the doppelganger? Rolf shook a bit more of the fuzziness from his head and forced himself to his feet. His balance was still compromised, but he steadied himself against a convenient dinosaur leg as he peered out. His balance was still compromised, but he steadied himself against a convenient dinosaur leg as he peered out for his foe. His balance was still compromised, but he steadied himself against a convenient dinosaur leg as he peered about for his foe. An unfamiliar creature, tall, gray, and sickly, lay sprawled some 20 feet down the hall from where he had ended up. It didn't move, but from that distance, Rolf couldn't tell if it was still breathing. He gave himself a once-over, patting his torso down to his extremities. Everything hurt. At least one of his ribs might be fractured, given the pain when he breathed, but nothing else appeared to be broken. Fern's staff, which not Rolf had identified as some kind of named artifact, lay near his resting place. Half of it, anyway. The young druid stooped to pick it up, nearly kneeling The young druid stooped to pick it up, nearly keeling over in the process. He took a moment to recover from the difficulty of his minuscule effort, making noises that it would. He took a moment to recover from the difficulty of his minuscule effort, making noises that would have put a grin on his father's face. On his father's face. On his father's face. He took a moment to recover from the difficulty of his minuscule effort, making noises that would have put a grin on his father's face. Rolf then made his way to the side of the corridor and retrieved his hammer. The staff hadn't been his first choice, and now that it was broken, it was even further down the list of preferred weapons. When Rolf had wielded it like a long club, swinging with his all his might from one end, he hadn't expected the item to, explode. It was magical, or had been, and magic items are known for their uncommon resilience. Sure, they could break, but it usually took more than one parry from an albeit enchanted dagger to destroy them. His fingers slid over the wood, and his thumbnail caught on a flaw where it had snapped, splintered and rough. No, this was a nick, a scored line of somehow. It was almost as if something powerful had scratched at it with a claw. Gertrude must have damaged it when she crushed Fern to death, he surmised. Which inadvertently saved my life. Again. Gertrude followed him with her gaze, but patted behind him when he approached the spindly thing on the ground. Its true form was taller than either of the figures it had been impersonating, wearing a nondescript outfit of heavy linen. It seemed whatever magic it possessed allowed it to transform not only its body, but clothing as well. That, or it was a separate talent. From the blood seeping out of the creature's nose and the missing half of its chest laying another 5 feet away from it, Rolf would never get the chance to ask. Probably would have said something insulting anyway, like, how I was too stupid to know the difference between talents and spells, Rolf complained, though Gertrude only snuffed in reply. Rolf spied the magical dagger laying off to the side and mentally marked it for retrieval. The only other gear the fallen doppelganger had was a belt pouch. It contained a few vials, but 2 were smashed into fragments, leaving only the stoppers intact. The liquid staining the leather wouldn't be any use to him. The one remaining bottle was a deep ruby red. Maiden's tears, Rolf cried, pulling the cork with his teeth and draining the contents in one mighty swallow. The relief spread through his wounded and weary body instantly, and he sighed almost indecently. Gertrude only snorted. You were out of commission for this fight, and I needed it more than you did. Rolf peered through Gertrude's legs at the remainder of the cage, longing for a trip back to the healing spring in Trike's stable. There was no likely way to get there, unless he wanted to convince Gertrude to peel the rest of the trap like a metal onion. Small gashes and scrapes covered the dinosaur's face and shoulders where she had forced herself through. Rolf grimaced. even considered Rolf grimaced, even considering asking her to injure herself further for the sake of a hot soak. With a renewed spring in his step, Rolf did a final pass of the area to scoop up the dagger and check for anything he had missed. Come on, let's put some distance between us and this place before another servant of the Master shows up to insult my life choices. Come on, let's put some distance between us and this place before another servant of the Master shows up to insult my life choices. One more time. One more time. Come on, let's put some distance between us and this place before another servant of the Master shows up to insult my life choices. Hi, Tyler. Ooh, that's a loud car. Let's give it a minute. Let's give it a minute. Give a minute. Oh, yo, I got this anger inside. Oh, yo, I feel like Jekyll and Hyde. Okay. I think the loudness has passed. Chapter 27. Promises, Promises. The pair traveled for what seemed like the rest of the day before stopping for rest. Rolf still couldn't wrap his head around the changes in architecture, though given there were three goddesses in the triad, he tried to accept it all as simply as another phase. The dark fitted stone of these new corridors. The dark fitted stone of these new corridors was so different from the earlier sandy, roughly chiseled hallways. Rolf considered it as they walked, turning the broken pieces of Fandring's staff over in his hands. The unfinished but bright passages before had been the maidens. These were the mothers, strong and serviceable. What would be next? Rotting wood and cobwebs for the crone? What would be next? Rotting wood and cobwebs for the crone? They walked on until they found an offshoot of the corridors which might have served as a larder or storeroom if there was a keep. They walked on until they found an offshoot of the corridors which might have been They walked on until they found an offshoot of the corridors which might have served as a larder or storeroom if this were a keep. More round than square, it sat in the elbow of an L turn in their path. Without Eliard to conjure rations for Delver stew, Rolf tucked into a cold meal of mushroom jerky and once again thanked Schulze for their hospitality. Even without the ability to speak, Gertrude insisted on taking watch by planting herself firmly in the doorway, which had no door to speak of until she lay across it. which had no door to speak of until she lay across it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He awoke in the morning with a heavy heart. Another serving of his dwindling supplies did nothing to assuage the hollow feeling in his gut. Eliard had abandoned them, and the specter of his father had tried to kill him. Rolf knew it wasn't Mason, but the hope that had bloomed in his heart at seeing the man left a void when it turned out to be a trap. He was physically exhausted, but moreover, the emotional toil of the past 2 days had drained him. While the promise made to Gertrude was important to him, Rolf suddenly longed for home. He missed the relatively calm days that he had spent in the stonemason shop. There, even as unskilled and stressed as he was about making ends meet, Robin Williams Jr. Hello. He missed the relatively calm days he had spent in the stonemason shop. There, even as unskilled and stressed as he was about making ends meet, he wasn't in mortal danger at any given moment. Nor was he forced to face a monster wearing a loved one's face. The labyrinth was sick and twisted. The labyrinth was a sick and twisted blessing from the Triad. He chewed on a tasteless mushroom, reminiscing about a time when he only made friends with the mice and the sad drunkards in the tavern. Gertrude was slow to rise that morning, but after the day they'd had before, he was content to let her sleep. Get a burp. There we go. Excuse me. He wasn't sure where they would go from there. Rolf had to pick a direction and start, or he might lie there with Gertrude until they rotted away. Rolf Rolf! An urgent whisper from beyond the archway called. Rolf's blood went cold. The voice was unmistakable. He stood from where he sat gnawing on a particularly chewy piece of fungus. Eliard? The cleric stepped into the light, cast by the single torch burning in the annex they had slept in. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I left. His voice echoed against the stone walls as he walked. Gertrude raised her head from where she slept and sniffed. Rolf was not ashamed to admit it. His Rolf was not ashamed to admit it. Tears welled in his eyes, and he wiped them away with the back of his hand. Hey, folks. Austin. Howdy, buddy. Gojo lover. Lol. Hello. The cleric stepped into the light cast by the single torch burning in the annex they had slept in. I'm sorry I left. His voice echoed against the stone walls as he walked. Gertrude raised her head from where she slept and sniffed. Rolf was not ashamed to admit it. Tears welled in his eyes, and he wiped them away with the back of his hand. Why did you come back? It was a mistake. I shouldn't have let you go alone. Eliard opened his eyes. Eliard opened his arms as if offering Rolf a hug. Rolf's mouth twisted with a wry smile. He stepped forward into the other man's embrace. I'm glad you came back. A gurgling sound immediately followed as the dagger he had rescued from the other doppelganger found its mark in an upward thrust through Eliard's abdomen. Rolf? Eliard's eyes went wide. Rolf! Eliard's eyes went wide, but his shape began to transform. Eliard never would have hugged me, you overconfident copy. Rolf twisted the knife for good measure. And was rewarded with a spray of blood from the thing's chest. He wasn't sure yet how to activate the magical properties of the weapon, so this would have to do. Your master is next. Your master is next. Rolf stepped back, letting the body of another doppelganger fall to the floor. He retrieved 2 additional healing potions from this one's pouch, which hadn't suffered any damage from this much less eventful encounter. It's just you and me now. He looked at Gertrude, then motioned to the body on the floor. She needed no further encouragement and snapped it up, throwing the corpse into the air before catching it with her wide mouth. The young mason returned to his squat to finish his meager breakfast. As Gertrude finished her own meal, the crunching of bones didn't bother him for once. The crunching of bones didn't bother him for once. Their journey continued in a similar, if less dramatic, fashion. Rolf found another stick to replace Fern's staff for trap-finding purposes, augmented with his detection spell. The power he had received from the Triad, compensating him for risking his life in this part of the labyrinth, helped set their pace. With Gertrude's power and Rolf's growing skill, They made their way through uncounted twists and turns. Rolf continued marking his path, though he began using the heat of the flame dagger once he found the correct sigil to press into its hilt. It wouldn't do to get turned around when they were as close as he felt to their goal. It wouldn't do to get turned around when they were as close as he felt to their goal. Plus, it was helpful when he needed to make a fire from whatever material he could scrounge. No dinosaur-sized pit traps caught Gertrude. No dinosaur-sized pit traps caught Gertrude, nor did bands of miscreants threaten to chase them back down into the tunnels. To the benefit of Rolf's sanity, they didn't encounter any more doppelgangers. What monsters they found, they fought. Rolf experienced the same tingling sensation, indicating his reward from the triad, but he feared no amount of grinding himself against the mortar of the maze would make a difference. He was done and wanted to go home. There was little left to do besides test himself against this master he had been threatened with. Nonetheless, he threw himself into their small skirmishes with a fatalism that added confidence to his hammer swings. The T-Rex was well fed, if nothing else. It took longer than Rolf wanted, and they backtracked on It took longer than Rolf wanted, and they backtracked on his markings multiple times, but after another 2 days of painstaking travel, he found himself staring at another set of massive doors. They were tall, black things carved in bas relief. They were tall, black things carved in bas relief. He picked out animals from within the labyrinth, depicted in stunning detail in the ebony wood. Among the menagerie sat a likeness of the crone. Normally depicted with silver hair, the lack of color in this work was striking. The ravages of time, wrinkles and all, stared back at him. At least his hunch about the composition of the labyrinth had been right. He lifted his hand to the huge iron ring hanging on one side, but as he touched the metal, the door swung silently open. Rolf turned to the dinosaur, who curved her neck to peer into the doorway, then glanced down at him. I have to burp. I burped. Rolf turned to the dinosaur, who curved her neck to peer into the doorway, then glanced down at him. He rested his palm on her leg. "We're going home, Gertrude. I promise." All right, we're going to pause. And then. And then we're going to come back. I got to go hydrate, pee, all that stuff. I shall return. Y'all be nice to freaking know me here. You don't know the lengths he goes to keep me sane. You don't understand the lengths that it goes to keep me sane. Mm, mm, push me, and then just touch me, and I can get my satisfaction. Push me, and then just touch me, and I can get my satisfaction. Wow. All right, we are back. Am I going to restart the TikTok again? iMod Customs joined. Hi, iMod. All right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think I follow him. Hello, Austin. Boom, 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 boom. Maybe I should open. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, file, save. Okay. File, new, audio file, underleveled. Session 14C. And we'll go ahead and restart the TikTok. Go live. Go live. All right. Another Altoid. Maybe I should do gum. Should I do gum instead? Keep that mouth wet. Keep the mouth wet. I'm not real. Hello, I'm not real. I'm not either. I am a figment of your imaginarium. You know, I went through my bookshelves yesterday looking for some quote material for some reels for voiceover and voice acting. And I saw the depressing volumes of Neil Gaiman books that I don't know if I'm going to destroy or if I'm going to put them in a box or some shit. I don't know. I'm never reading that shit again. Why am I getting red messages? Hmm? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's see what that notification was. Boop. Okay. Cool. All right. Chapter 28. This is not what I expected. A grotto, not dissimilar to Trike's stable, greeted Rolf on the other side of the door. Though there were Though where the other dinosaurs' lair had been utilitarian and ascetic, this was a verdant opulence Rolf wouldn't have expected to find in the depths. This was a verdant opulence Rolf wouldn't have expected to find in the depths. It wasn't that there were trees and grass, no, but analogs to them abounded. It wasn't that there were trees and grass, no, but analogs to them abounded. Moss, plush like the bed he had slept in. Moss, plush like the bed he had slept on in Shulza, covered the majority of the floor. The path in front of him The path in front of him was stone, the same as the hallways they had just been through, but the edges were covered in living landscape. He stood in quiet awe, and in the silence, the trickle of a stream caught his ear. He cast his gaze about and caught a glimpse of a small rivulet running through the subterranean garden. A sweet perfume in the air tickled his nostrils, and he coughed slightly at the aroma. Gertrude huffed similarly, making a reptilian equivalent. Instead of trees, giant mushrooms dotted the room. It was larger than even the chamber containing the cistern had been. The ceilings were higher as well. Mm-mm. The ceilings were higher as well. Torches were fewer and farther between, intermixed with some of the glowing fungus from the roughest parts of this level. All in all, it mimicked a dimly lit evening in a forest glade. Except it was 95 levels below the ground, and nothing was as except it was 95 levels below the ground, and nothing was as it should have been. What brings you here, young one? Rolf jumped. His fingers darted to the hammer at his belt in automatic response to the grizzled and high-pitched voice. Sitting among the moss with a staff made from a curled tree root resting next to him was a diminutive kobold. Rolf had never seen one before. Rolf had never seen one before, and despite its slightly monstrous appearance, it addressed him in perfect common. After his experience with dessert, Rolf was less surprised than he could have been. The kobold had a characteristically long and narrow face, punctuated by scaly outcroppings across the crown of its head. The most unusual part of his appearance had less to do with his physical attributes and more to do with the fact that he was more The most unusual part of his appearance had less to do with his physical attributes and more to do with the fact that he wore spectacles and loose fitting clothing. Rolf hesitated and let his hammer fall back to his side. "Sorry, I didn't see you," he said. The kobold didn't reply, only looked up at him with those beady eyes. Rolf scanned the newfound scenery. "Where is here? And who are you?" The kobold appraised him as though he wasn't certain if he wanted to divulge the information to Rolf. I don't suppose you made it to the center of this maze without knowing what you were getting into." Rolf's nerves bristled. It wasn't the kobold's words, but the way he had said them that put the mason on edge. "You might be surprised," he replied, keeping his tone even. "I didn't actually make it here in the usual way." "What is the usual way?" the kobold asked. Rolf found himself shrugging, though a tiny voice in the back of his head wondered why he was being so conversational. There was something about this place. A peace smoothed the ruffled edges of his nerves. There was something about this place. A peace smoothed the ruffled edges of his nerves. You know, you get some people together, hack and slash your way down, you make plans. You know, you get some people together, hack and slash your way down, you make plans. He splayed his fingers in demonstration, like laying a map out on a table. I didn't have the luxury. Interesting. What brought you down here? What brought you down here? Mm-mm. What brought you down here? Rolf felt the day wear on him. The kobold seemed pleasant enough, and he hadn't had much of a chance for casual conversation that wasn't talking to Gertrude, mostly himself, or Eliard. "May I sit?" The kobold nodded and gestured to a patch of the grass opposite him, and Rolf sat. A pleasant scent wafted to his nose, and he inhaled deeply, settling into the comfortable moss. Gertrude grumbled, but he ignored her. "That's the thing. I'm not supposed to be here," the mason explained. "That's the thing. I'm not supposed to be here," the mason explained. "A freak accident, really. Fell through my basement." The kobold nodded sagely. "Sometimes we are brought places we never would have otherwise been." Rolf shrugged. "I don't really believe in fate, but I am glad I'm here. Sort of." Gertrude rumbled deep in her throat again, and from the corner of his eye, he caught her crouching as though preparing to pounce. "Hey, we don't need that. We're just chatting." Gertrude whined, but relaxed a little. "Sorry, I don't know what's gotten into her," he said politely, but the kobold simply shook his head. "It's no bother. It's no bother. It's no bother. Mm-mm. It's no bother. He slowly drew himself up, standing about as tall as Rolf's collarbone, where he slowly drew himself up, standing about as tall as Rolf's collarbone, were he to stand himself. Fate is an interesting thing, the kobold mused, considering your surprising entrance. Is it surprising? Isn't that what you just told me? I'm only being conversational, unless you're here to kill me, that is. Isn't that what you just told me? I'm only being conversational, unless you're here to kill me, that is. Certainly not, Rolf laughed. Certainly not, Rolf laughed, and it turned into an expansive yawn. His head swam when his jaw snapped shut. It hadn't been long. It hadn't been too long since he'd slept, but he could go for a lie down. The kobold was a pleasant surprise, all things considered. Maybe whatever the triad had in store for him wasn't a fight to the death, after all. I'm not much of a warrior. Found out I'm a druid, of all things. Really? Really? Underestimated people, druids. The kobold nodded sagely. Natural magic is powerful. Rolf didn't know this kobold from a hole in the ground, but part of his mind rebelled at him for chatting away like he was drunk on booch back in Shulza. Who are you, anyway? And why are you here? He was proud of himself for putting the smaller creature on the spot. Something rustled near his leg and startled him, but the kobold raised a calming hand. Don't worry about them. His voice droned on and lulled him back to rest. My name is Carvalak, and this is my grotto. It's a place for weary delvers to rest before the final trial. Damn it. It's a place for weary delvers to rest before the final trial. That's very kind of you, the mason added, and his eyelids drooped. The mason added, and his eyelids drooped. They remained closed for half a heartbeat before he forced them to open again. The moss was comfortable, and he could use another nap if the last count. And he could use another nap if the last encounter was ahead. Rolf checked on his dinosaur companion. Rolf checked on his dinosaur companion. Gertrude hadn't laid down, but crouched near the ground, her own eyes fighting against the pull of sleep. She seemed decidedly uncomfortable, though compared to his She seemed decidedly uncomfortable, though, compared to his own calm. Her large feet shifted nervously under her, and she snapped weakly at the air. It's so relaxing here, Rolf said, with a mouth thick with impending sleep. He let his eyes close, leaning back into the dense moss. The kobold nodded. Yes, that's the poison. It makes it much easier for the larvae to eat you. Yes, that makes sense, he thought dreamily. The greenery shifted ahead of him and chittering back. The greenery shifted beneath him, and chittering, much like the sound he had heard elsewhere in the labyrinth, reached his ears. Then Rolf's eye snapped open, though they did try to close immediately again. The surge of adrenaline through his system fought against his lethargy and roused him from his state of impending unconsciousness. He sat up with a jolt. The what? Rolf reached blindly for his magic and cast the first spell he could think of in his addled state. An enormous, green, glowing circle surrounded him, stretching at least 100 feet in every direction. Carvalok sat grinning amidst the results of his spell. The entire room was a trap. Chapter 29. Good, bad, I'm the guy with the dinosaur. Good, bad, I'm the guy with the dinosaur. Rolf's head still spun as he tried to understand what was happening. Carvalok said nothing, only staring at Rolf with a wide-toothed smile. His brain was slow to catch up, but he finally grasped what Carvalok had said. Poison! Rolf's next move was a gamble, betting against his lack of delving knowledge. He fumbled as his... Rolf's next move was a gamble, betting against his lack of delving knowledge. He fumbled at his pouch until he came away with one of the 2 healing potions recovered from the doppelgangers. Rolf had no idea what the limit of the magical drafts were, or whether they would cure his affliction, but he was too far gone to consider other options. He pulled the cork with his teeth and took a swallow. The lethargy faded from his limbs, and his thoughts sharpened again. Rolf would have whooped for joy if Gertrude hadn't taken that moment to stumble to the side, about to pitch over. He scrambled to his feet and ran to her, casting his communication spell, the blue glow taking its usual perch. The blue glow taking its usual perch on the carnivore's snout. He shouted, "Open wide!" Thankfully, she did just that. I have to burp again. There we go. Excuse me. Thankfully, she did just that, and Rolf pitched the remainder of the potion straight down her gullet. Whether the poison had affected her less, or the enchantment ignored things like body mass, Gertrude's pupils widened and she clambered to her feet. She snapped at Carvalak, but the kobold's nimbleness belied his kindly old sage appearance, and he leapt clear of her jaws before they closed around him. The small monster whirled, bringing his staff around to point at Rolf. He muttered something, and the end of it glowed a sickly red. The mason barely jumped out of the way as a malevolent bolt screamed toward him. A magic user too? Rolf complained inwardly. He took a bad tumble, avoiding a second bolt, landing heavily on his shoulder with an unpleasant crunch. Rolf rolled over one of the squirming lumps in the moss, and a pair of razor-sharp pincers tore through the lush ground cover. The disgusting form of a cave crawler nymph. The disgusting form of a cave crawler nymph wriggled into the open air. He scanned the area, and an oddity in the geometry caught his eye. The glowing trap, visible only to Rolf, hadn't centered itself on the kobold. No, if he did some mental measurements, as the center was 20 feet away, where there appeared to be... No, if he did some mental measurements, the center was 20 feet away, where there appeared to be an extremely large, hollow trunk of a tree. The problem with that observation was there had been no other trees in the room. Yes, subterranean equivalents dotted the landscape, mosses and large ferns that thrived on damp and neglect. But the trunk was distinctly out of place. If that wasn't indicator enough, the sickly sweet smell he had noticed earlier became stronger when he pointed his nose in that direction. Rolf took a desperate chance. He didn't want to throw away one of his only real weapons, but he still wasn't much of a fighter beyond swinging his hammer. As he rounded Gertrude's large body, he drew the flame dagger. He used the dinosaur's bolt to grant himself some cover, though he immediately worried she would become the target of Carvalok's spells. Given how large she was, even he could hide. Given how large she was, even he could hit the side of a barn, so Rolf decided it was mostly unavoidable. He pressed the signal to ignite the blade, drew his arm back, and threw with all his might toward the tree trunk. Rolf's aim was true, and luck was with him as the steel sank to the hilt. The enchanted steel passed much deeper than he expected, and a hideous screech erupted from his target. The shape and color of the trunk wavered and changed, resolving into a disgusting, gray, fleshy mass. It had large mandibles, which clacked menacingly, but only swayed back and forth. The multiple legs along its side alternately reached for nothing and tried to grasp at the dagger piercing its side. The nymphs, crawling through the undergrowth, let out high, keening calls. Rolf didn't know this monster, but he deduced it must have been a queen of some type. The larvae under the moss were its children, and he had almost fallen asleep on them. He shuddered, then raised his voice. "Gertrude, kill that thing!" Rolf didn't have to tell her twice. Gertrude roared, nearly deafening him. She clearly had not liked that Carvalak and his pet monstrosity had tried to kill them. The dinosaur stooped as if she was going to bite the creature in half, but seemed to think twice as the pungent aroma hit her nostrils. She growled, spun, and struck the thing with the meaty part of her tail. Rolf anticipated the creature sailing to the far wall, but instead it disintegrated. Pink guts, gray flesh, and larval jelly sprayed everywhere as the impact atomized the cave crawler queen. Rolf's gorge rose as he was hit with the ichor and blood, but he choked it back, turning to Carvalak, who stared at him in horror. "So, Rolf tried to say, but couldn't stop himself from. So, Rolf tried to say, but couldn't stop himself from dry heaving. He held up a hand to forestall the kobold from interrupting. Was that the test? Carvelac chuckled and straightened his posture. His back popped loudly as he lengthened his spine and stood nearly to Rolf's height. It wasn't as tall as it sounded, but Rolf wasn't a tall man, so it struck him as impressive nonetheless. No, human, that was merely to weed out the less intelligent challengers. He eyed Gertrude, who was trying to shake the queen's remains off her scales. They locked gazes, and the dinosaur lunged toward him. Carvelac raised his staff, and an emerald glow erupted from it, a beam streaking toward Gertrude. Stop! Gertrude screamed, and held his palm out to Gertrude. He reached for his magic again, feeling something new. He didn't understand the whole of it, but pushed the same way when he had detected. He didn't understand the whole of it, but pushed the same way he had when he had detected a trap for the first time. A white light burst from his outstretched hand and reached Gertrude's muzzle before the other magic users. A white light burst from his outstretched hand and A white light burst from his outstretched hand and reached Gertrude's muzzle before the other magic users. It spread over her entire body like she had bathed in a crystalline pool. Carvelac's spell bounced harmlessly off the shell, and he stood wide-eyed. You are more powerful than I gave you credit for, little druid. You resisted my potion, killed my minion, and denied me your dinosaur. I'll do more than that, Rolf blustered. Carvelac gave him a manic grin. Mayhap, but you won't deny me mine. Your what? Rolf swallowed heavily. A roar sounded from the far side of the room where Rolf hadn't ventured. It lay partially in shadow, and to Rolf's dismay, it had clearly hidden something from their initial It lay partially in shadow, and to Rolf's dismay, it had clearly hidden something from their initial inspection. Massive thumps pulsed through the floor, and the mason was suddenly reminded of his time tied to the stake at the other end of this level. No, Rolf said, almost too softly to hear. Much like a moment so many days prior, the first thing to become visible out of the darkness was a snout. Rows of sharp teeth the size of Rolf's torso reflected the dim light, and eye shine glinted brightly as the massive predator's head and eye shine glinted brightly as the massive predator's head and eyeshine glinted brightly as the massive predator's head swung its way and eyeshine glinted brightly as the massive predator's head swung this way and that. Rolf couldn't believe it, but the beast sauntered lazily into the view. No. Rolf couldn't believe it, but the beast sauntered lazily into view. It could have passed for an older sibling of Gertrude's, and it stood half a head taller. And it stood half a head taller than his dinosaur. It yawned in a surprisingly cat-like gesture, inhaled a great inhaled a great breath, then bellowed a challenge. Rolf glanced nervously at Gertrude, who rolled her eyes. The gigantic monster distracted both of them as Carvelac ran to greet it. The diminutive spellcaster, damn it. The diminutive spellcaster emitted a brief golden burst and levitated high enough to reach the creature's back, where his saddle waited for him. Rolf hadn't taken in the minute details and had missed a pattern of leather straps ornamenting its torso, securing the seat. Carvelac waited midair as the monster turned to allow him to descend and secure himself. What in the name of the triad is going on? Rolf asked aloud. She is another coupling, cousin, damn it. She is another cousin, Supperling, Gertrude whined. You know her? No, but I am aware of her kind. The giants. Gertrude blew a disdainful snort. She is the worst. Rolf took in the new dinosaur and tried to pinpoint differences between the two. The giant, besides being taller, had a larger mass than Gertrude. Her tail was also slimmer, and the way she moved inclined Rolf to believe she would be nimbler on her feet than Gertrude. Carvelac cackled brightly from his high seat. If you yield now, I will grant you a merciful death. If you yield now, I will grant you a merciful death. Rolf sighed. Carvelac was also apparently going to be the worst. If there was one thing the Mason was mightily sick of during his entire experience below the earth, it was powerful beings threatening him in dramatic ways. He readied his hammer and considered whether any of his magic would be. He readied his hammer and considered whether any of his magic could be brought to bear. No, thank you. I've got bills waiting for me at home. Very important, you see. No, thank you. I've got bills waiting for me at home. Very important, you see. His magic must have translated. His magic must have translated his words in an appropriate way as Gertrude hissed a lizard-like chuckle at the joke. Rolf grinned as well, considering how far he had come from cowering behind a stalagmite to quipping at mortal enemies. Rolf grinned as well, considering how far he had come from cowering behind a stalagmite to quipping at mortal enemies. Despite his levity, the situation was dire. He reckoned it didn't matter at this point. It was much better to die with a joke on his tongue than with soiled pants. Their tactic for splitting the attention of the Triceratops and Rider wouldn't work here. For one, they no longer had Eliard and his magic. None of Rolf's spells seemed optimal for combat, and even his thorny shield couldn't. None of Rolf's spells seemed optimal. None of Rolf's spells seemed optimal for combat, and even his thorny shield wouldn't deter the giant if she was as agile as he feared. Second, splitting up wouldn't help the pair. Carvelac was just as likely to ignore Rolf in favor of eliminating the real threat in the room and save squashing him for last. What do we do, Gertrude? We are so close, tiny dinosaur. We fight. We are so close, tiny dinosaur. We are so close, tiny dinosaur. We fight. Rolf nodded and tightened his grip on his hammer. I did promise, didn't I? In a hero's journey from the stories of his youth, Rolf could have imagined charging at a gigantic monster in front of them. Nope. In a hero's journey from the stories of his youth, Rolf could have imagined charging at the gigantic monster in front of them. His pragmatic nature told him, however, his pragmatic nature. His pragmatic nature told him, however, that would have been stupid. Instead, they held their ground together. Wait for the charge and try to get out of the way? Gertrude nodded without taking her eyes off the enemy. The Gigantosaurus, Giganotosaurus, the Gigantosaurus, for Rolf could think of her as nothing else. Scraped her feet against the ground. She tore up swaths of moss and sent cave crawler nymphs flying before charging the two of them. Rolf waited until the rider and his massive steed got closer, then tried to recreate the spell from the last battle. He dredged it up from somewhere in his core, focusing, and concentrated on a spot 10 feet in front of them. A root shield covered in thorny protrusions sprang into existence. Rolf tensed, waiting to find out if his trap would work. Carvelac whooped with glee, and the giant gracefully sidestepped the oversized caltrop, barely breaking her stride. Gertrude Mm, mm. Carvelac whooped with glee, and the giant gracefully sidestepped the oversized caltrop, Barely breaking her stride, Gertrude set her back foot and grunted as the larger dinosaur slammed into her. The mass difference between the two was obvious, and Gertrude slid backward, losing ground to her larger opponent. She twisted her neck and tried to bite Carvillac from his perch on the other dinosaur's back. Gertrude's jaws snapped shut over empty air, feet away from her intended target. Carvillac's mount turned her own massive teeth on Gertrude's exposed neck and sank them deeply into her flesh. Gertrude screamed in rage and thrashed against the bite, freeing herself but leaving a large flap of scaly skin in her opponent's mouth. The T-Rex placed the bony part of her skull against the monster's neck and gave a mighty shove, knocking it slightly off balance. Through all this, Rolf fought his own instincts to rush in. He could do little against a creature of that size, and there was no fancy saddle for him to ride Gertrude into their final battle. It was more likely he would get trampled underfoot than be helpful. Instead, he visually searched the room for anything useful. The only things he found were more nymphs crawling through the undergrowth, trying to flee from the battle waging above them. Rolf had what was perhaps the worst idea he'd had so far and said a quick prayer. Maiden, forgive me. Mother, guide my hand. And Crone, bless this idiotic plan. As Gertrude circled the larger beast and the pair sized each other up for the next encounter, Rolf scanned the ground. He found a shape moving away from him, which was what he wanted. He grimaced and shoved his hands into the deep moss and grasped at the slimy body of a nymph. It writhed and wriggled, but continued to try to move in the opposite direction. It didn't bring its mandibles around to bite at Rolf, yet anyway. He heaved and drew the squealing monstrosity above the ground, swinging it around to keep the small, razor-sharp jaws away from him. He continued his circular arc until he was pointed in roughly the right direction and released the creature with a mighty throw into the air, sailing directly toward Carvillac. This first strike didn't hit the mark. It passed over the kobold's shoulder, close enough to distract him, but not enough to be a true threat. That being said, Rolf's smile broadened in triumph for having gotten even that far. Perhaps, when this was all said and done, I lost my place. Perhaps, when all this was said and done, he'd enter next year's hammer toss during the Mayfair Summer Games. Rolf repeated his attack, grabbing yet another fleeing nymph. This time he suffered small lacerations before he was able to send it flying towards his intended target, but the nymph struck the saddle and skittered over the top of it before falling to the floor. This might work, Rolf thought. Unfortunately, that was also the moment when everything went wrong. Chapter 30. The Winds of Change. Carvillac turned his attention on the young mason, throwing small monsters in his direction. His staff began to glow a familiar, sickly crimson, and Rolf knew bolts of magic were in his future. Rolf dove as Carvelak fired at him, hitting the moss instead. He landed heavily with a disgusting squish and was immediately set upon by the other young cave crawlers. They swarmed over him, some biting with their sharp mandibles, others simply using his body as a bridge to move farther away. He fought to regain his feet, kicking the things off and earning more lacerations in the process. Eventually, he stood and jumped away, only to be Eventually, he stood and jumped away, only to be struck in the chest by a red lance of magic. It bowled him over, sending him sprawling into a segment of the stone pathway this time. The only positive was it was bereft of nymphs. And he groaned in pain as he reoriented himself. Gertrude fought valiantly, trading attacks with her opponent. The T-Rex even spun to lash out. with her tail, sending the other dinosaur sliding. Unfortunately, she received another bite for her trouble. The larger raptor latched onto the tip of her tail and pulled, yanking her feet out from under her so she fell to the ground, sending up a spray of ichor from the nymphs she crushed. Gertrude groaned and rolled, lashing out at the gigantic dinosaur with her clawed feet. She had suffered multiple wounds at this point. Her neck, the first place she had been struck, seeped blood through the skin. He couldn't tell if she had lost the tip of her tail or if she had lost the tip of her tail or if it was simply broken. For each rake of claws she gave as she tried to stand, she received one in kind as the swifter of the two darted in to tag Gertrude with her own talons. The giant must have felt like she had the upper hand as she freely traded blow for blow. Rolf watched as a helpless sickness spread into his stomach. Carvelak must have given him up for dead or defeated as he lay there, for he turned his attention to Gertrude. Carvelak must have given him up for dead. Carvelak must have given him up for dead or defeated as he lay there, for he turned his attention to Gertrude. The kobold raised his arms, and the staff took on a malevolent green hue that reflected in Gertrude's eyes. The T-Rex's movements slowed. She was clearly tiring and losing blood. I have to do something, Rolf thought. He was injured himself, but not to the same degree. He fished the final healing potion from his pouch and climbed to his feet again. Rolf had made it 3 steps across the moss when Carvelak shot an emerald beam from his staff straight into Gertrude's chest. She roared, and it turned into a shrill keening as the light burned into her. Her scales smoked and blistered like the kobold had poured acid onto her. At the same time, his mount dove in and struck with its teeth. The monster wrapped her jaws around Gertrude's throat with a sickening crunch. Rolf screamed in wordless rage and threw the potion at Gertrude. Something broke inside him as her strange wail continued. He didn't watch the glass bottle, knowing his aim was true. He didn't watch the glass bottle, knowing his aim was true enough to hit something Gertrude's size. No, his focus had turned inward. Something built. Something built within his chest. A feeling he didn't recognize. The roar tore from his lips before the rest of his body bent against itself. More than a painful experience, it was wildly more than a painful experience. It was a wildly disorienting one. Bones snapped and bent, the itchy sensation of scales emerging from his skin. He fell onto his hands and knees and watched in bewilderment as his fingers elongated into sharp talons and his vision sharpened. The crawling of the nymphs was painfully audible, and his brain buzzed with the onslaught of the new sensory information. Once his body stopped stretching, Rolf's skin ached and was excruciatingly sensitive, like he had sloughed a sunburn. He glanced down at his own, damn it, I lost my place again. He glanced down at his taloned hands and marveled. They were short, lizard-like arms. He groaned, and it came out as a weak rumble, similar to Gertrude's. I am a dinosaur, he thought, followed immediately by, Gertrude! He whipped back his head to her. He whipped his head back to her, the Giganotosaurus. The Giganotosaurus towered over the smaller dinosaur, left where she had dropped her. He moved slowly at first, but his hesitant steps quickly grew into massive strides, steady on splayed feet. His limbs carried him across the space faster than he had ever run, but he barely noticed. Rolf reached deep into himself, searching for one more trick, another piece of magic he could leverage to save his friend. Something inside him responded. Something inside him responded, burning through his limbs as he ran. He grew. Something inside him responded, burning through his limbs. And as he ran, he grew. Something inside him responded, burning through his limbs, and as he ran, he grew. His vantage point already higher. His vantage point already higher than his normally short stature grew taller. Rolf wasn't eye to eye with the giant, nor would he have reached Gertrude's chin, but whatever he had done to himself placed him level with the larger dinosaur's arm. He launched himself at the monster, sinking his teeth into the soft area beneath her arms where it met her chest. The dinosaur screamed and wriggled, trying to throw him off of her. He dug in tighter, punching his talons into her scaly hide to anchor himself. Warm blood splashed over his tongue, and he fought between revulsion and exultation, and a new primal part of his brain responding. A new primal part of his brain responding to the unfamiliar flavor. Despite his efforts to hold on, the Giganotosaurus heaved and tossed Rolf backward, but not without sending a small portion of its flesh with him. Rolf shook his head, spitting out the gobbets of meat that clung to his teeth. He threw his head back and screamed. When he trained his gaze on his enemy again, he caught an incredulous T-Rex staring at him from the ground. Her wounds had partially closed, but one potion wasn't going to bring her back to full strength. Rolf nearly wept in relief, briefly wondering if dinosaurs could cry, but threw the useless musing away. His rage abated slightly, and with it, some of his height. No, he tried to say, but it came out as a mess of hisses. He stabilized a head shorter than he had been, and a cold ball of anxiety dropped into his stomach. The giant looked from Rolf to Gertrude, considering which was more of a threat. For his part, Rolf scratched his feet against the moth. For his part, Rolf scratched his feet against the moss, flinging his own share of nymphs into the air, and settled into a predatory crouch to await the assault. Gertrude did her best to scrabble to her feet again, taking the opportunity afforded by Rolf's distraction. In the blink of a dinosaur's eye, the Giganotosaurus stood flanked by the two of them. The tables hadn't turned, not by a long shot to Rolf's mind, but perhaps they stood a better chance than they did before his metamorphosis. Gertrude bellowed a challenge, and Rolf echoed it, further deepening the larger predator's indecision plain on her face. She stamped uncomfortably, scanning back and forth between them. Rolf's chest erupted in pain as a new green beam struck him, a second lancing into Gertrude's skin as well. Apparently, he had been right, and he cursed internally as Carvalac's magic poured acid across his scales. The kobold's magic was more powerful than it had seemed from his vantage before the spell was. The kobold's magic was more powerful than it had seemed from his vantage before, and the spell was debilitating. He curled in on himself, mind afire with agony. The kobold's shrill voice rose in another cackle. Pathetic druid! You think copying my friend here will save you? No, but this might, a familiar voice cried. Rolf opened his eyes, which had been shut in pain, to witness something he had never expected in his lifetime. to witness something he had never expected in this lifetime. Eliard galloped at full speed, astride Trike, long spear at the ready, trained on the monster's torso. The lance impacted her scales with an audible thud, then rammed through, the momentum carrying it deep into her stomach. The beast screeched and reared back, throwing Carvelac from his saddle. Iliard left his weapon embedded in the enormous creature, wheeling Trike around in a long arc until he faced the enemy again. Carvelac hovered dazed in the air, suspended by magic. The giant dinosaur pawed ineffectively at her wound, snapping the wooden shaft of the spear, but leaving more than half of the weapon lodged in her flesh. Rolf took a blast of energy to the side of his skull, hurled from Carvel. Rolf took a blast of energy to the side of his skull, hurled from Carvelac as he recovered his wits, but no new acidic attacks followed. The attack rocked his head back, and Rolf's vision fuzzed. He twisted in on himself, and in a heartbeat, he had shrunk down to his normal size, retaining his lizard-like features. In another breath, his body reverted to its original form, leaving him gasping. He hastily dodged another burst. "Rolf! His staff!" Eliard screamed, pointing at the spot in the ground pointing at a spot on the ground not far from the young mason. Okay, I'm going to take a break. I know we're almost done, but I don't want to push too hard. Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and end that one. And then we're going to hammer. All right. Goodbye, YouTube.